Randy's lecture was entitled, Really Achieving Your Childhood Dreams. It was about 6 of his childhood dreams that really came true, and why he thought he was able to make them all happen. I'm going to talk about 2 of them, floating in zero gravity and becoming Captain Kirk. Randy wanted to experience zero gravity. It was very clear that he never wanted to be an astronaut. He just wanted the floating. And it turns out that you don't have to spend a career in the Air Force or even go into space to experience weightlessness. NASA has an airplane called the KC-135, affectionately known as the Vomit Comet. The plane flies in parabolic arcs, and at the top of each arc, the passengers experience 25 seconds of weightlessness. NASA ran a competition in which undergraduates proposed experiments to conduct in zero gravity. The winning proposals would get to board the KC-135 and conduct their experiments for real. Randy's group won, naturally with a proposal involving virtual reality training for weightlessness. Randy was happy for his students and ecstatic about the idea of boarding the Vomit Comet and experiencing zero gravity for himself. Then he read the fine print. Faculty advisors were forbidden from accompanying the students on the plane. However, the students were allowed to invite a local journalist to cover the event. Randy called NASA to ask for a fax number. When they asked what documents he was sending, he told them he was sending his resignation as faculty advisor and his application to accompany the team as a journalist. The man at the other end of the phone line said, "That's a little transparent, don't you think?" Randy then explained to the man that his group was doing a virtual reality experiment, that he would be bringing the necessary gear for all the winning teams to try virtual reality, and that he could get the whole affair plenty of media attention. They gave him the fax number, and Randy did indeed get to experience zero gravity. This story is of particular interest to me because I was there at the time, and I knew what Randy was doing. I remember thinking that the whole thing was a little slimy. NASA had a pretty explicit rule, and Randy was clearly breaking it. But Randy didn't see a rule, he saw an obstacle. And then he saw an arrangement under which both he and NASA could get something that they wanted. He explained this to NASA, and they agreed. Randy's symbol for such obstacles is the brick wall. Time and again, he talks about having to surmount obstacles in order to achieve his goals. And the most basic piece of advice is to never give up. He says, and I quote, "Remember, the brick walls are there for a reason. The brick walls are not there to keep us out. The brick walls are there to give us a chance to show how badly we want something. Because the brick walls are there to stop the people who don't want it badly enough. They're there to stop the other people." When Randy got to the part about being Captain Kirk, he got a good laugh out of the audience just by showing a slide with some text on the projection screen. The slide read, "Being like Captain Kirk." The "being like" was crossed out and replaced with "meeting." I'll paraphrase Randy's words here. What a role model for young people. What I learned that carried me forward in leadership later is that he wasn't the smartest guy on the ship. Spock was pretty smart, and McCoy was the doctor, and Scotty was the engineer. And you sort of go, what skill set did he have to get on this damn thing? Clearly, there is this skill set called leadership. And whether or not you like the series, there's no doubt that there was a lot to be learned about how to lead people by watching this guy in action. End quote. Now I'm only 34, but my dad had a soft spot for Star Trek reruns. So I've seen enough to know what Randy was talking about. Kirk is an inspiring leader. When a plan is needed, he's bold and decisive. As a manager, he's not always nice, but he clearly knows how to make the people around him achieve great things. In hindsight, I think Randy's leadership style really was inspired by the original captain of the Starship Enterprise. This wasn't in Randy's lecture or the book, but here's my favorite memory of the Captain Kirk moment with Randy. It was my second year of graduate school. Randy's research group had outgrown our tiny lab. We were happy to acquire the room next door, and as soon as the previous inhabitants had left, we rushed in to scope it out. We had big plans, and the counters and cabinets that ran along one wall were a valuable waste of space. They would have to be removed before we began our work. Naturally, I decided that we should contact facilities and have them get rid of the cabinets. I had no expertise in cabinet removal, and I was sure the university had some rule against non-union employees doing that sort of thing. That evening, as a colleague and I were finishing up work, Randy stopped by to see the new space. He asked about our progress, and I told him that we could set up our project after I contacted facilities about removing the cabinets. He walked over to the wall, looked inside the cabinets, and stooped down to look underneath. Then he grabbed it and pulled vigorously until he had pried one off the wall, and held the cabinet apart in the process. He dropped the wood in a pile at his feet, looked at us, and left. We picked up the pace a bit after that. When Randy replaced being like Captain Kirk with meeting Captain Kirk on his slide, I guess he just didn't realize how much he'd become like Kirk. Maybe he was just too hung up on the fact that he wasn't really on the starship. Anyway, for Randy, the dream was fulfilled by meeting William Shatner, the man who played Kirk on TV. Shatner was writing a book with a chapter on virtual reality, and he wanted to meet Randy and his research group. I was there, and I personally fumbled to explain 3D graphics to him. Ask me about it sometime if you're interested. Not everyone thinks that Captain Kirk is a positive role model. Some find him arrogant and abrasive. This was true of Randy as well. Tact was not his strong point. He had a habit of simply saying what he thought. The last lecture audience was full of famous professors, and Randy made a joke about how people outside academia work for a living. Didn't go over well. Randy's response was, I detect nervous laughter. One of the best things about the last lecture video is that nobody knew at the time that it was going to become a media sensation. The anecdotes are genuine, the language is conversational, and his real personality is on display for all to see. If you want inspiring thoughts about how to live your life, read the book. If you want to see Randy as he truly was, watch the video. Writing a sermon about Randy wasn't easy for me because, as I began to write, I realized that I had never properly grieved his loss. For a young graduate student just out of college, a thesis advisor can be like a parent in some ways. Randy himself often made this analogy, and he said that students often go through a pattern that looks a lot like the transition from adoring child to rebellious teenager, and then eventually to appreciative adult. I lost Randy just as I was entering the appreciative adult phase. I'm still struggling to reconcile the aspects of his personality that drove me crazy with all of the fantastic gifts that he's given me. The fact that the entire nation now knows him as a saintly self-help guru doesn't help me. What did help me were the words of a colleague named Evan Rappaport, who also worked with Randy. This is paraphrased from Evan's blog entry in honor of Randy. An unfortunate consequence that results when someone is both honest and intelligent is that people sometimes perceive the person to be arrogant. Randy addressed this in his lecture and his book, so I was always drawn to this aspect of his personality. I really enjoyed hearing him speak because he did not shy away from saying something that would make him look arrogant if he knew that what he had to say was important. I firmly believe some people have earned the right to speak their mind, and Randy was certainly in that group. If people prefer to ignore the ideas of those they perceive to be arrogant, that's their own loss. Perhaps it's better if one is perceived as wise yet humble, but that's just not the way all smart people are built. It doesn't make their ideas any less valid. End quote. Evan is right. Randy was honest and intelligent. Like Evan, I'm the kind of person who would rather hear a difficult truth than a comforting lie. So what exactly was it about Randy that I found so difficult? The answer is simple. As my advisor, Randy assumed responsibility for my development, not only as a computer scientist, but as a human being. Many of the uncomfortable truths that Randy spoke to me, in his characteristically blunt style, were uncomfortable truths about my work and my abilities. Constructive criticism is still criticism. While I was working with Randy, I did my best to take it to heart and improve myself rather than dwell on the hurt. One thing that kept me going was a powerful memory from a conference that I attended. I was trying to find some company for the lunchtime break, and I approached another professor that I knew to see if I could join him. Sorry, he said, but he was having lunch with one of his former PhD students. I watched two of them walk away side by side. Two men, once master and apprentice, now peers. I thought to myself, that will be me someday. I'll meet Randy at a conference, and we'll have a friendly chat over a meal. With the struggle behind us, I'd be able to appreciate all that he had done for me, and he'd be proud of my accomplishments. We could get to know each other as friends. Randy's cancer robbed me of that part of the relationship. I'll never have that lunchtime chat with Randy, but it helps me to imagine it. I have a job that I enjoy, where I use a lot of the skills that he helped me develop. I think he'd be proud, and I tell him how much I appreciate all the things that he taught me. Randy would even understand that I wasn't always as appreciative as I might have been. I'm sure of that because he told me so. He wasn't really talking about me. He was talking about himself and one of his own mentors. Here it is in his words, paraphrased from the last lecture. I had a coach, Jim Graham, who was 6'4", and he had played linebacker at Penn State. He was just this hulk of a guy, and he was old school. And I mean really old school. Like he thought the forward pass was a trick play. There was one practice where he just rode me all practice. You're doing this wrong, go back and do it again, you owe me, you're doing push-ups after practice. And when it was all over, one of the other assistant coaches came over and said, "Coach Graham rode you pretty hard, didn't he?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's a good thing. When you're screwing up and nobody's saying anything to you anymore, that means they gave up." End quote. Goodbye, Randy. I'll miss you. Thanks for never giving up.